Welcome to our next installment of the series, Origins of the Roman Empire. In today's episode, we look at the urban development of Rome. We look at the beginnings of the city, which districts were the first to develop, and which buildings are among the oldest and most sacred in this place, so steeped in history. Rome is so different from any other Latin settlements. It can be described more as a city that was created rather than one that became. It was not a small farming settlement that developed over time into a mighty city, but rather one can speak of an artificial emergence favored by river trade. The countryside around the area was already cultivated and occupied by castles before Rome was built. Contrary to the tradition of open villages, Rome was more of a closed city, a large part of which did not belong to the farming population. Due to the poor air, aria cativa, the citizens preferred to live on the airier and healthier hills nearby, and then went into the city to work. The area was densely populated because even according to the oldest city constitution, they provided a citizens' militia of 3,300 free men, which in turn meant that the city had at least 10,000 free inhabitants. Due to river trade in particular, Rome had a commercial character that was considerable in comparison to other Latin cities, but it was still no match for a trading city like Carthage or Corinth. The original urban complex probably only comprised the Palatine Hill, later also known as the quadrangular Rome, Roma quadrata. The name refers to the square shape of the Palatine Hill. The gates and walls of this city ring remained visible until imperial times. The site was the center of the entire city. The Palatine Hill was home to some of the oldest and most sacred buildings in the city. I would like to mention the assembly building of the Curiae Veteres, the assembly house of the knights, Curia Saliorum, the repository of the sacred shields of Mars, the sanctuary of the wolves, Lupercal, and the dwelling of the priest of Jupiter. A large part of the foundation legend was also located on the hill, the thatched house of Romulus Casa Romuli, the shepherd's hut of his foster father, Faustulus, or the sacred fig tree. The Casa Romuli was a simple, thatched and mud-plastered house that was revered by the Romans. It was preserved until the 3rd century AD. There were no actual temples at the time, and the community sites were apparently moved elsewhere very early on. There are no longer any recognizable traces of this, but the later place of Apollo may have been the oldest meeting place of the citizens. The Festival of the Seven Hills, Septimontium, commemorated the inclusion of the 7th hill in the city area. These suburbs were initially protected by weaker ramparts bordering on the original wall ring of the Palatine. The 7 hills of the Septimontium were Palatine Hill, Palatium, Sermalus, the northwestern peak of the Palatine Hill, Velia, the ridge connecting the Palatine with the Esquiline, which later almost completely disappeared due to imperial buildings, Sucusa, Subura, one outside the rampart, protected the new city on the Carines, and the 3 heights of the Esquiline, the Cispius, the Fagutal, and the Oppius. It should be noted that the 7 hills of the Septimontium are not the same as the 7 hills of Rome. This name refers to the hills that were surrounded by the Servian Wall, which was built after the Gauls destroyed Rome in 387 BC. There is disagreement in historical research as to which these 7 hills were, but classically they include the Aventine, Caelius, Esquiline, Capitoline, Palatine, Quirinal, and Viminal. According to the Roman tradition, Servius Tullius, the 6th king, abolished the Romulian tribes and redivided the city into 4 urban tribes and 26 pagi, which coalesced into 17 rural tribes. The names of the 4 urban tribes were based on the 4 regions of the city that they represented, while those of the rural tribes were likely based on the names of families that owned considerable tracts of land in those areas. Urban settlement did not begin inside the castle, but below it. Therefore, although the Palatine was the original seat of the Roman community, the oldest settlements were located around this hill. They form the first and second quarters in the Servian city division. The two districts were very contrasting in their appearance, as the following anecdote illustrates. It was an old, sacred custom to sacrifice the so-called October horse to Mars every year. After the horse was sacrificed, the men of the Subura and those of the Sacred Road fought over the horse's head. Depending on who won, the head was nailed to the Mamilian Tower in the Subura or to the royal house, Regia, on the Palatine in the district's honor. The two halves of the old town were considered equal in status. The third quarter listed in the later city division, the Esquilae or suburb, had an inferior status to the other two. Esquilae can be translated as exterior extension, which makes his status clear. The neighboring hills such as the Capitoline or the Aventine were already inhabited but were not yet part of the city of Rome till the time of the Roman kings. Traces of settlement can be traced back to the Middle Bronze Age, approximately 1700 to 1350 BC, and point to the so-called Latial and Villanovan cultures. Rome is known to have been founded in 753 BC, so a lot of time passed between the first small settlements and the founding of this legendary city. In the next episode, we will continue to look at the urban development of Rome. Stay tuned, your geek philosopher.